Evening, everyone. So, Donald Trump is causing a bit of trouble. What I need to do, first of all, is just set out the sort of general premise here because, so I've entitled this, how can Europe, and that includes the UK, of course, Trump-proof itself or at least mitigate some of the impacts of Trump. Now, it's easy to imagine what I'm talking about here is, right, so, he's threatening trade war. He's not helping out with Ukraine. That's going to cause us problems later on. It's going to cause us problems in the short term in terms of trade, if you want to be hard-nosed about it as well. And, and what can we do about this? But that doesn't go to the extent of what the problem is, because if you're listening to the talking points, it's all about the threat of tariffs and the threat of pulling out of Europe altogether. But it goes beyond that. So I want to draw a little parallel here. Because Liz Truss, when she was Prime Minister, do you remember that? The good old days, in some ways. Liz Truss was asked as Prime Minister, is France an ally? Now, I don't know why she was asked it. I don't remember. But I do remember that she said, I don't know. Which was a mad thing to say. And the reason I think she said that was because she campaigned for Remain. Now, that doesn't mean to say she was a Remainer or anything like that. She could have been a secret Brexiteer and was campaigning for Remain because David Cameron was, and, he was her boss. But it is entirely possible that she never really believed in Brexit. And like a lot of Tories after 2019, had to pretend that all of a sudden they were committed Brexiteers. Now imagine this scenario. You've got to play the role of someone who's really into the hard Brexit, but you're not. So you often over-egg it. You like ham acting, because politicians aren't generally good at, sometimes you get someone like Glenda Jackson, who probably is a good actor, or was. But generally speaking, politicians are not actors. So you get a lot of ham acting. And I think that's what she was doing. She was trying to pretend to be a hard Brexiteer. So instead of just being able to say, well, yes, of course, France are our allies, but we also want to cultivate links around the rest of the world, which an actual Brexiteer would say, she went down there. Now, we've got this situation now where it was utterly insane for her to say that at the time, because what is there about France that is not in alliance with us? But if we say the same about America now, if we say, is America an ally? Because it used to, like, Donald Trump on Monday, he's going to have been president for the second time for 5 weeks. A couple of months ago, America wasn't just an ally. It calls itself the leader of the free world. It's always a bit insulting. It's not, of course. But it is more accurate to say the leader of the Western world. So 2 months ago, America was the leader of the Western world. We'll often have disagreements with them. But at the end of the day, we tended to defer to them on a lot of issues, right? And not just us, even some of the spikier European countries, when push came to shove, sort of deferred to America on several issues. Now, it's no longer the leader of the Western world, that's clear. Because it's not leading on anything. Like Donald Trump, for example, is whining, saying these negotiations with Russia are only happening because of him. It's like, but there are no negotiations with Russia. They don't exist. You've had talks. That's not the same thing. In a negotiation, you get concessions. I'm going to talk more about this in a video tomorrow because I cannot believe what I found out today. But you get concessions. Donald Trump has not won any concessions from Russia that I can ascertain. Like, what has he got Russia to agree to? I can't find anything. He's basically bullying Zelensky because Zelensky is in the weaker position. That's all. And so now I'm looking at it. And even there was an American news outlet. I think it might have been MS. I can't remember. But there was an American news organization that's actually said now, regarding Ukraine specifically, not the Western world, but it applies to the same thing. It was saying America is no longer an ally of Ukraine. At best, it is neutral. And at worst, it didn't use the word enemy, but, it talked about heralding its demise, I think, which means the same thing. And so, look at what's happening at the moment. So the tariff thing, the trade war, actually at the moment seems the least of our concerns. I'm going to read something out here it was a bit of a roundup in the Financial Times about things that's happening. So, according to the Washington Post, apparently, the US Defense Secretary, Hegseth, has ordered... I mean, remember, for a start, Trump's already started replacing senior military leaders now. He says he wants to get rid of woke military leaders. Now, there is a suggestion that maybe he does just want to replace senior military leaders with ones who are more on his page politically speaking, that he just wants to weaken the American military in terms of diversity, because diversity is strength. However, it is also possible that he is planning for a future whereby the military would need to stop him breaking the Constitution. So he wants to make sure that the military would be under his thumb by then. But anyway, so what they're saying now is they were identifying programs, because they're going to make cuts. They're making cuts across the board. So the US Secretary of State for Defense was outlining the programs that are going to continue. It includes Indo-Pacific, because America's very keen on countering China, and Trump himself is hawkish on China as well, so that fits. It also includes homeland defense. And that's it. It's pointing out here that the military programs that are not going to get funding includes European Command. It also includes, interestingly, Middle East and Africa Command. Right? So, here's the thing. We know that Russia obviously is invading a European country right now. This is suggesting America may pull completely back, that America may not have a military presence in Europe beyond manning a few bases that it wants to have, you know, where it has missiles. But also in Africa, we know that Putin is destabilizing parts of Africa specifically to create a refugee crisis, which doesn't necessarily cause a big problem for America, but does for Europe. Basically, and this is what I mean about, you know, is America an ally anymore? I don't just mean because it's doing things which are really screwing us over. I mean, if it's actively now going to help Putin in his efforts to completely destabilize Europe, America could be considered at this point an enemy. But how do you go from America being so entwined with America being the leader of the Western world, which it undoubtedly was, to possibly an enemy in such a short space of time? And there's lots of people, I don't understand these people because many of them are anti-Brexit, who will just go, well, we need to just drop America, we need to ignore America, we need to tell Trump to do one. And it's like, you people are against Brexit. We learned that, didn't we? If people didn't know beforehand, what happens when you try and disentangle yourself from close political and economic alignment? It goes very badly wrong. So we cannot do that with America. So what can we do? And there are a few things. I'll catch up with some comments in a moment. Like, one of the big things we really need to do, obviously, is boost defence. But we have to do it efficiently, because we're not going to be able to double defence budgets. There are some countries who probably should, but we're not going to be able to double defence budgets. Like, people, for example, are saying, like, you know, if the UK boosts its defence to 3% of GDP, that won't even touch the size. But it's like, but it would if everyone else in Europe did the same, because one of the only reasonable things that Donald Trump has tended to talk about is the fact that a lot of NATO members are not actually contributing to NATO. There's supposed to be a 2% minimum. It's like a minimum drink limit, isn't it? A minimum drink buy in a pub. You're supposed to contribute at least 2%, and there's some that don't. But if every country in Europe, some do more. Poland has the most. If I suppose Ukraine technically, but out of NATO countries, Poland contributes the most. The difference. So Jeffrey's just saying there, the difference is the EU wasn't telling us to shove it. That's not a difference. That's irrelevant. That's words. The thing that caused us damage was trying to disentangle ourselves economically and politically from the EU. That's what damage does. The same thing would happen with America. The problem we have here is that America is potentially doing it from their end as well. So imagine if we had a situation with Brexit where we were going for a hard Brexit and the EU had the same attitude. That would have been doubly problematic for us. That is the potentially thing that's happening with America, you know. But what we really need to do is boost defence spending in an efficient way, which means, and various people have said this, not buying American systems. We need to actually invest in production in Europe. We already have some production in Europe, of course, but production in Europe, and make sure that with this common defence fund that's also makes it more efficient. It's a common defence fund, that it gets its stuff from other European countries. So we boost our own economies, not America's. The problem with that, and this is where you've got problems with absolutely, I've listened over the past few days to lots of people making very good points about how we should disentangle ourselves from Trump's America. And all of them, if you could go instantly from A to B, rather than what would realistically take 10 or 15 years, they'd be brilliant. The problem is you can't, and while you're doing it, you're effectively doing something that Trump won't like, and he is crazy enough to punch himself in the face if it hurts us more. You know, I basically view, in terms of our relationship with America now, it's been like conjoined twins, where Trump is punching us in the face, but we're still like tied to them. So ideally what we need to do is to build up European capacity, boost defence spending. And Trump likes that. He likes the idea of us boosting defence spending, but he likes the idea because we just then spend that money on buying more American stuff, right? Whereas what we'll go is, no, we're going to spend it on European stuff, and he won't like that. Andrew, they're saying, can we realistically create our own military industry infrastructure when our focus has been selling things, small things, stuff to the Yankees? Yes, we can. Yeah, we can. Because the thing is as well, and it's not a particularly pleasant side to the arms industry. You can sell it to others as well. Others will buy it. You know, so because we have developed things in Europe. We have developed military technology in Europe, some big stuff, and we sell it to others as well. Like the Typhoons, we've sold to others. Now, obviously, the downside to that is if you, as was said in Yes Minister at one point, if you sell military equipment, you're going to end up selling it to people who want to use it, and they don't always want to use it for defense. So, but at the same time, we're in a situation, like, look at the situation. We've got an actual military incursion to the east of Europe, and we've got Russia also destabilizing Africa, creating a refugee crisis, which is destabilizing the whole of Europe politically, because now we're ending up with anti-immigration feeling, largely driven by fear of refugee crises. Because for economic migration, when people talk about, like, members of the public talk about, we're okay with controlled migration. Economic migration is always controlled, always. The only thing that isn't is asylum. And in our case, it's still ridiculous to blow it up because we have very few asylum seekers. Even if we accepted everyone, which we don't, it's very few. But they blow it out of proportion. But Europe as a whole is taking a lot of refugees. And if America now is not even going to bother to counter Russia in Africa and maybe the Middle East, then what's to stop that getting much worse? You know, this is a real serious threat to Europe. And I'm not really here, apart from little obscure posts, I'm not really seeing a lot of discussion about it. And whenever I read someone suggesting, well, we need to do this or we need to do that, it's the old fallacy in politics whereby someone says, I want to, like, crap politicians are the ones who say, oh, this is my policy. And you look at it and you go, that's not a policy, that's an outcome. That's an outcome. How are you going to do it? Like Nigel Farage, I'm going to have net zero immigration. That's an outcome. How are you going to achieve that? Oh, you don't have an answer for that? How fun. And this is the same thing. I've seen people suggesting things that we do. And every time they come up with one, it's like, but this cannot be done quickly. And in the meantime, if we do it, because it's not in America's interests, like, and they're crazy enough to hurt us. Don't think, normally you would say, oh yeah, but if they applied these tariffs, it hurts themselves even more. He doesn't care. He's not bothered. He's a lunatic. It's really very difficult. There's a comment there saying, scrap Challenger, buy Leopards, buy more Euro Typhoons and Gripens, push our new Boxer program to European countries. So, but this is the thing. We're having a strategic review at the moment. I strongly suspect it's not going to be brilliant because it's all now very reactionary. Oh dear. But everything we do takes time. That's the problem. And if what we're doing is not what Trump wants us to do, he is capable. Because the thing is, like, you're talking about, like I said in Graham's stream yesterday, for example, one of the things Starmer can go with, he's already apparently, his plan on defence has sort of been okayed by Trump anyway, so they'll be presumably firming that up at their meeting. But, one of the things we can do is say, look, we've got this plan to boost defence spending. That's what you want. But it's going to be really difficult to fund. Now, we can do it. We think we've got this plan to grow the economy and stuff like that. It's already starting to work. Brilliant. But if you hit us with tariffs, then that's going to make it harder for us and we won't be able to do it. So that's the sort of carrot and stick you can use with Trump, to avoid him slapping with tariffs. But if from Trump's point of view, if he's already planning on pulling America out of Europe, he doesn't care what happens to Europe, right? You could try and tell him, but if you allow Putin to destabilize Europe, we're going to be poorer. We can't afford to buy as much American stuff, right? We can't afford to buy as much of your stuff. Now, that's what we need to try and get through to him. But we also know he's a very stupid man who doesn't understand trade. He's a billionaire. He must be one of the only billionaires in the world who, on no fundamental level, understands trade. Will the USA leave their UK bases? No, I strongly suspect they'll man their bases. Apart from anything else, they like having a presence in Europe to back up Israel, right? But I can see, again, we're looking here, the US Secretary of State for Defence, who wants cuts, the government is trying to cut the crap out. If this is like austerity on ketamine, right? And they're talking about the fact that they need to maintain funding for the Indo-Pacific Command and the Northern Command, which is their homeland defence, few other things as well. And they are not saying that they're going to maintain spending on, like, why say that you're going to support agency funding for Indo-Pacific Command and Northern Command and not also say European Command and Central Command, which is like your Africa, Middle East bit. So that suggests to me, now we don't know over what time scale, but at the moment you're looking at Trump and he's acting like everything has to be done in 6 months at the moment. So maybe those US troops in Europe will seek asylum. Well, what would be interesting, of course, from Trump's point of view, all of these cuts are going to involve, it's not cutting money, is it? It's not just money. They're cutting service personnel, aren't they? So, presumably this, we never get the details from Trump, do we? It's always like he says things and we don't really know what he's going to do because he doesn't think things through, and neither now do the people around him. He used to, at least when he was president the first time round, be surrounded by people who at least thought things through. He might not have done, but they did. Now he's deliberately surrounded himself with people who won't tell him he can't do a thing, which means he's surrounding himself by people who don't know why he can't do a thing. But if they're talking about massively scaling back the defence budget, they mean getting rid of a load of service personnel. Because, what's going to happen if they pull out of Europe? Where are they going to go? They don't need them. They've already got... some of them they can reposition, I suppose, in the Indo-Pacific. But they're talking about overall cuts. That means overall cuts to personnel. So they're going to make a load of service personnel redundant, which will, of course, flood the labour market in America, weakening everyone's bargaining position for wages, meaning people in America are going to be much poorer because they're chasing after too few jobs. And of course, if he starts a trade war, then that reduces the total number that reduces American productivity as well. And the whole thing will spiral into never mind austerity. This is now becoming like Thatcher's Britain in some ways. It's like dog eat dog. Chris there saying, my only concern is Reeves will reach for the cutting services lever to fund any increased defence spending. No, she won't. Now, we know that that's not realistic because although she has said, in order to balance the books, she will cut if necessary. But Rachel Reeves, has made it really explicitly clear in the budget, in her budget statement, in everything she's said over the last couple of years, that in order to get growth, we have to have infrastructure. So she's not someone who thinks in terms of the household budget. Oh, we haven't got enough money, we'll have to cut back. She knows that if she cuts back, she's already cut back on the spending she didn't think she needed, right? And that upsets some people. So she's already cut back on what she thought she could do without. So by definition, if she does make any cuts now, she is cutting something that she knows is going to be long-term bad for the economy, which is very unlikely. Granted, there are not necessarily easy answers, but there are other things as well. We have to remember it is possible to fund a boost in defence spending via other means than just taxation or cuts. There are other ways to finance these things. It may involve being a bit... In fact, hold on. I'll tell you what it was that she might do. Because this is what drew me, right, to this Financial Times article. Which, unless you got a subscription, you won't be able to read. I'm sorry. But I'll read it out for you. Here, this was the headline. Would you believe this headline? In Europe's crisis, Starmer and Badenoch should learn from Sunak. Now, that's a hell of a thing to say, isn't it? But what do they mean? Because he was a political idiot. But they're not talking about politically. They're talking about economically. So they made the point, where is it now? Because Sunak did do something while he was Chancellor that the Tories didn't like him doing, but he did it anyway, and the public were fine with it. Let me find it again. Right, here it is. It says here, there is a solution from Rishi Sunak's time as Chancellor. He faced a series of ill-advised commitments on tax like Rachel Reeves does now. He opted to break the... Because remember, Rachel Reeves has promised, no, she won't be coming back for more tax rises, right? Just like the Tories did. So it says here, he opted to break the spirit, but not the letter, by introducing the Health and Social Care Levy, which his party hated, but the country did not. Reeves should do the same thing with some kind of security and defence levy now, although another option is some kind of joint EU, UK, Norway debt issuance. So that, by the way, they're referring to, I've talked about this before, Donald Tusk's idea of Poland. He has suggested a big pot of money, based on common debt around Europe, and it would be not just an EU thing, because it would have to include the UK as well. The UK is the biggest spender in NATO, aside from America, in raw terms. And also Norway would want to be in on it anyway. So they're saying, learn from Sunak, he couldn't pay for petrol or talk to the homeless, utterly incompetent and out of touch. Yes, but they do have a point. When he was faced with a situation where he needed extra money for something, but couldn't really cut, because they already cut everything to the bone, excuse me, and also couldn't just increase taxes, he came up with a way to do it, which wasn't borrowing, because that would have done the Liz Truss. And it was a special levy. And the idea with that is you can sell that to the public. Now, I haven't seen polling specifically on this, but I imagine that the public, because if you look at opinion polls that sort of skirt around the issue, the public would be very much in favour of us boosting defence spending. Normally they're not, because defence spending, people sort of, I've said before, the problem with things like pensions and benefits is a lot of people, ordinary voters, who are neither retired nor out of work or disabled or anything that needs either of those systems, tend to resent anything that the DWP spends because they don't see the direct benefit to themselves. You don't quite get that with defence. People do want a military. They want us to. They know we need to maintain a military, but talking about increasing defence spending tends not to be a vote winner as such. It's just like, we want a military, let's just not have it too big. Particularly as we tend not to approve of some of the things we've been doing with our military in my lifetime. Some things are, some things not so much. So, but at the moment, defence spending is probably really popular. It would have a lot of public support. So the trick is, how do you package it? What mechanism do you use? So people may well go with the idea of a special levy specifically for this thing, right? So that is a way. So it doesn't have to be the case that Reeves either has to cut or increase taxes as such. She can do this Sunak fiddle. But anyway, what do I make of Scholz talking about courting us for our nuclear deterrent? Could it be used as a way to get back in the EU on favourable pre-Brexit terms? No, not to be rude to the Chancellor of Germany, but he's not going to be the Chancellor of Germany for very long. So unless he's saying something that his successor would also say, I don't really see that. The other thing as well about this nuclear deterrent, it's like, okay, there are people who believe in the concept of a nuclear deterrent, right? I'm not totally sold on it. I sort of accept that given that a nuclear power is actually invading Europe and wants to take more than just a bit of Ukraine, it wouldn't make sense to get rid of them. But nuclear weapons are incredibly expensive. They're expensive to buy. They're expensive to maintain. They're expensive to birth. I mean, we had the thing, for example, during the referendum on Scottish independence, because the nuclear submarines are basically birthed in Scotland. It's like, it's not a straightforward thing to just transfer them outside of Scotland. Like, there's nowhere, like, you need a, we haven't got anywhere. We haven't got anywhere. So, but the thing is, so it's expensive is what I'm saying. And like, I don't think the answer to having to boost defense, the defense we need is conventional forces. That's what we need, forces we can use. We're not going, like, why would we spend lots of money on extra nuclear capabilities which we don't actually want to use? I mean, we've already got a deterrent. The UK is a nuclear power. France is a nuclear power. We have nuclear powers in Europe. I don't see any benefit in having more, right? I don't think America would also... I know Trump is talking about nuclear disarmament, which actually I'm fully in favour of. And he's not talking about it being unilateral. So, you know, I absolutely let him get on with that. But the... yeah. Nuclear weapons are fine so long as we don't use them. Well, the idea of a nuclear weapon is you need for it to do anything at all, because you don't actually want to use it, right? So given that you don't want to use it, the only way it has any power is if you can at least get your opponents or your enemy, I suppose if we're talking in war terms, to believe that you might use it. And even if they're 95% certain you won't, that's not good enough. It's not worth the risk, right? But here's where that argument breaks down, because Putin thinks of us as weak. He's right, by the way, because we're not countering him. America has basically been conquered. Putin has conquered America. It's really that simple. And even in terms of Europe, I mean, when I heard people talking about, like, even on the UK side, the British side, talking about deploying peacekeepers to Ukraine, they were talking about defending ports. They weren't talking about being on the front line. So they're not even talking about if Russia tries to take more territory, that we will defend that. We won't, because they're saying the idea that we would engage Russia is mad. Why is it mad? They're engaging us. What? I don't understand that. So you're talking about, Europe, from Putin's point of view, America's defeated. That's it. It's gone, finished. Europe hasn't been completely defeated yet. And yet we are openly saying we do not want to engage with Russia directly militarily. We'll supply weapons with others who will, but we don't want to do that. Why then would Putin believe we would even use nuclear weapons? Why? In fact, we may end up in a situation now where Putin starts to wonder if, I mean, he may not even be capable of deploying nuclear weapons, but let's say he is. If he doesn't think he would get retaliatory strikes back, I mean, that's quite a dangerous thing. So the way what happened to our peace dividend in 1992? Who knows? We spent it all. We spent it all by allowing, I mean, if you go back then, by the way, so before Putin, of course, I mean, we had Boris Yeltsin, right? He was pleading with the West to not let Russia fail. I mean, obviously after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia itself struggled. And there were people at the time, I remember, saying that we have to be careful we don't make the same mistake as the Treaty of Versailles. Now, the Treaty of Versailles was a bit different because that was deliberately about making Germany, like humiliating Germany. It was almost a deliberate attempt to humiliate Germany. So that was incredibly stupid. There was no deliberate attempt to humiliate Russia. We wanted to be friends with Russia. But we also didn't do enough to bolster them. So what did we do? We allowed fascism we allowed the conditions for fascism, a strong man leader to emerge again, which is exactly what happened. And then when he started testing the waters and he started nibbling away at Georgia and bombing the shit out of Chechnya, we didn't do anything. He invaded. He sent basically a busload of people into Crimea. We didn't do anything. We should have just turned them back. We didn't do anything. Full-scale invasion 2022, we didn't really do very much. We wouldn't have done anything at all. If Zelensky had actually fled Kiev, we would have done nothing. We actually were prepared to do nothing. It was only because Ukraine said, no, we're drawing a line in the sand here, that we actually did anything. So from Putin's point of view, we are provably weak. And we don't stop being weak until we are prepared to actually fight Russia in a battle, not via proxies, but directly. Until we are prepared to do that, Putin will know that we're not, because if I know we're not prepared to do it, because I'm reading about it in the pissing news, he knows about it. So why would he take us seriously? Could UK ask Canada to babysit spare nuclear weapons? Why would we do that? The only place we would conceivably deploy them would be here in Europe. I think Starmer doesn't want to explicitly say he's going to go to war with Russia. I don't think anyone wants to say that. But you have to at least say that you are prepared to. Otherwise, where is any deterrent? Because the best military is one that acts as a deterrent. Because war is bad for everyone, even the winner. It's bad for everyone. It hurts you economically. It hurts relations, because it's not very good for relations when you kill your, a country's people, because you're going to kill their soldiers. So it's, it breeds a lot of bad blood. So no one really, well, some people do, but people generally don't want war. But if war comes to you, you have to accept it's a thing, and you can't just say, well, we'll just give in to all your demands then, because then there's no war. Because it's like, no, but that's worse. There are worse things than war. You say the two other US houses are going to spank Trump. Well, I don't think so. They're not doing right now. At the moment, I mean, Trump, like I say, is coming up to 5 weeks in office, and look at what's happened already. Absolutely insane. He's not holding back. He's say Karen saying, like Croatia and Rwanda, the UN stood by and let atrocities continue. And yes, it was only because Ukraine said we're not moving. Well, the UN can do nothing. The UN has no power. The UN is a talking shop. The UN exists to let people blow off steam. It's there to try and persuade people. If you didn't have the UN is toothless, but it doesn't. That's not to say the UN shouldn't exist. It should, because sometimes, but all it has is the power of persuasion. Sometimes that persuasion works. Sometimes it doesn't. It has no teeth. It can't have any teeth. It's impossible to have teeth, because there is no higher power telling the world that can tell the world what to do that is benevolent, right? So inevitably, the UN can be effective in organising action against a rogue state if it's in the interests of the major powers of the UN to bring that rogue state to heel. No one really cared about, no one still cares about Rwanda. Croatia ended up being a little bit different, I suppose. Starmer should hand Trump a crown next week. Trump will love him. Maybe it'll break his neck. They're quite heavy, you know, crowns. They're not an easy thing to wear. I don't know. Roger there saying, echoing my thoughts here, our best hope is that they are idiots. That is our best hope, in actual fact. That they are, like, you know, I was saying on yesterday. So Elon Musk, a couple of days ago, was carrying out an interview where he was clearly as high as a kite. Absolutely as high as a kite. And people were going, this is absolutely insane. You've got this man who's got all this power and he's coked up. And my response to that was, no, we actually need to feed him more drugs. Stop complaining about the drugs. The drugs are now our best hope. Because Trump, Musk and the rest all have evil intent. Seriously evil intent on their own people, not just others. Like, it's not even like it makes logical sense. They're not even acting in their own country's interest by being bastards. They're shitting on their own people worse than anyone else. Apart from, I would say the only people not being shat on more than Americans right now are Ukrainians, because like we've been saying for the last few years, if Russia stops the war, if Russia goes home, there is no war. There will be no counter-invasion. No one wants to invade Russia. Russia doesn't want Russia, like the looks of it. That's why they keep trying to invade every other bugger. But if Ukraine stops fighting, there is no Ukraine. That is the problem. So that is what we're looking at potentially now. We have to make sure that we no longer can hope to get Ukraine back to its proper international borders. So we have to now maintain what of Ukraine we can. It's like trying to rescue part of an organ or something, or a tooth, isn't it? But Punita, they're saying, what about the deal Zelensky made with Canada to own America without Trump present? Why won't Trump just accept it? Yeah, some people should put that to him. I strongly suspect Keir Starmer will not be doing. It's utterly insane. I mean, Keir Starmer, like Macron as well, they're both, I mean, there's multiple people meeting with Trump. But when they go and meet Trump, it's going to be diplomacy unlike any other. Like, we've got to go and engage with him knowing he's an enemy, or potentially an enemy. He may not. I mean, it's like they say in America, he may just be completely neutral. And because he's neutral, it's a bit like, you know, when you sort of say, when there's like a fight, it doesn't have to be a literal fight, it can be a political fight, but whenever there's a fight, anyone who's neutral, who stays out of it, is effectively supporting the winning side. It's like, if you don't vote, if you don't vote in a general election, you have supported whoever won. So if the person who wins is one that you're fine with and you're neutral, that's fine, that's okay. If the person who wins in your constituency is someone that you really don't want representing you, it's like, well, you should have voted for someone else then, shouldn't you? And it's the same here. You know, America could genuinely just be completely neutral, but that neutrality is effectively helping Putin, whether they do it directly or not. So we've got to go to Trump knowing that he is either directly or indirectly helping Putin to... His aim is to destroy Europe, to actually destroy Europe politically. He doesn't want to blow the whole land up, but politically to destroy Europe. That's what he wants to do. So we've got to go there and engage him, but we're not doing so from a position of strength. I mean, and it's absolutely mad. We need to try and project a position of strength, but we haven't got one. And it's all incredibly difficult. The EU may have to pursue closer economic ties with China, yes, who are authoritarian to count the US, which is a liberal democracy. Yes, but China is at least a functioning state. It is authoritarian. It's a dictatorship. It's open. It doesn't even... It's not like Russia. Russia's a dictatorship, but Russia pretends to be democratic. China doesn't pretend to be democratic, doesn't pretend to give a shit about free speech, doesn't pretend... Any of these sort of Western values, doesn't pretend to have them. Doesn't need to. Doesn't have that baggage. So, yes. But at the end of the day, and it's a stable nation. It's the reason why, as I said, and this is why, although what's happening may be going further than people might have imagined Trump would go, or as quick, Labour knew what was coming in broad terms, because we literally had a situation in October. David Lammy, Foreign Secretary, was still openly criticising the Chinese government over the treatment of Uyghurs. The second it was confirmed that Trump was going to be president again, we publicly at least stopped doing that. And it was a clear shift. They were a bit open about it, really. It was a clear shift because we now know that we have to get close to China. And they knew that before Trump had done anything. 2 months before he was even inaugurated, we immediately decided, yeah, we need to get close to China here. So the EU may well have to do the same thing, because at the end of the day, the EU is in a slightly stronger position because it is an economic superpower as well, in the way that the UK is not. So, but at the same time, it's not an easy thing for even the EU to be hawkish, albeit economically, because the EU don't run a military, but hawkish with both the America and China. So, yeah, I mean... there are a number of idiots online who believe Russia is the injured party. We have to engage on the social media side as well. I mean, it is absolutely insane that people can imagine that. But that is, again, it's a consequence. I blame the media for everything, you know. It's a consequence of the fact that the mainstream media made themselves untrustworthy. So that now... So what happens if you cannot trust the mainstream media and you don't have critical thinking skills? Because if you've got critical thinking skills, you can still read stuff in the mainstream media and you can just say, well, hang on a minute, what proof are you presenting me with, right? You can still get information. What do? You don't have critical thinking skills, but you know that the mainstream media is untrustworthy. You will get your information from other sources. You know, you'll do your own research. And the consequence of that is that you end up with a load of people falling for propaganda. And it is a consequence of the fact that our mainstream media is not reliable, that it's not trustworthy. So people know what isn't trustworthy. They don't necessarily know what is. They just go to another source. And they go to a source that contradicts our mainstream media, and therefore it must be right. Aubrey there saying there's no ifs or buts. Trump is all in for Putin. Trump's problem is that EU and NATO had time to prepare themselves, and UK... Giving UK Putin time to trip Putin's army. I think you mean weaken it down. The thing is, though, although, I mean, Putin, he can't keep throwing bodies into the meat grinder forever. You know, he wasn't likely to win a war of attrition if America kept back in Ukraine. But, I mean... If America does pull out completely, like I don't know what Trump will or will not do. Because again, I've said this before. You look at, you look at what he's talked about on the trade wars, on tariffs, but what has he actually done? He's talked a big game, but he hasn't really done very much. And maybe he will, or maybe he won't. We don't know. It's the same here. Maybe he's prepared to pull out all of his troops in Europe. Maybe he's not. And this is always the problem with Trump. with a lot of other world leaders, you sort of know when they say they will do a thing that they will do it or they won't. And you can't tell with Trump. He's actually mad. I don't know whether he's clinically mad. I'm not a psychologist, but he's sort of mad in the sense that it's like when I was in the Scouts, there was a kid called David Harvey there's something wrong with him, right? So, and he was so suggestible. He would do the craziest things. One time on this camp, we'd built this rope bridge between two trees across a bit of a river thing. And there were a couple of scouts just lounging around on it. And someone went up to David, right, and gave him a hatchet and said, chop that down. And he did. He just went bang. And the thing fell into the river, the little river thing. And these scouts got soaked. And it's like, well, stupid thing to do. But he did it because you just suggested a thing to him. And he did it. He didn't think through consequences. Trump's like that. He doesn't think, he just thinks he's the big I am. He thinks he can do whatever he likes. I believe that he is prepared, and I don't know whether to believe it, but I believe he might be prepared to just say, I'm withdrawing all, staff the bases, American bases in Europe, but otherwise withdraw all troops beyond that which is necessary just to keep them operational. Not even defend them from attack, just enough staff to keep the military bases in Europe operational, no more than that. Just enough to keep them clean and the gates locked. That's it. I could be prepared to believe he could do that. And then where would we be? Yeah, well, they will be in a bigger mess because, again, like I say, they'll have a load of servicemen and women who are all suddenly unemployed, hitting a shrinking labour market. But there you go. Brother saying, if Ukraine want to do top trolling, they should tell Trump. I would say, shove this bad deal up your butt, but Musk and Bezos are blocking it. Well, I mean, Zelensky, of course, is the only... I mean, he's clearly decided... He's gone along with Aubrey and clearly decided that Trump is absolutely now completely in Putin's thrall. So he has now... I mean, he hasn't exactly told Trump to do one, but he is the only leader who has openly basically said, he's behaving as if Trump is unpersuadable. Zelensky has certainly stopped being diplomatic, shall we say. The thing is, how much leverage does Ukraine really have? Because America wants them to sign that rare minerals deal. What happens if he just goes, no, not until we get our land back? And there's lots of questions I don't know the answer to because no one's really asking them. Jeff, they're saying there's a good video from one of the US independent media outlets on a Finnish article about how Trump started dumb and is getting dumber. My description, not theirs. Well, we know that he's undergoing mental decline, cognitive decline. We know that. That's evident. That's obvious, right? So Trump was always ignorant and stupid. His own mum said he was, his own mother, for goodness sake, who I don't think had any animosity towards him, nonetheless said that he was a stupid man. He's not clever. He's not a good businessman. He doesn't understand trade. So he already doesn't understand things. This is someone who, remember, during his first presidency, got a Sharpie out to persuade someone of something, as if it was like this detailed scientific thing. And on another occasion, when scientists were showing the effect of bleach on the COVID virus, mused, oh, maybe we should inject people with bleach to kill COVID. So that's where he was. He's now way less capable cognitively, which means, again, he's like my mate David Harvey. He's highly suggestible and he's surrounded himself with people who are suggesting the most insane things. The best thing we can hope for is, as we said, they are ultimately too stupid or coked up or drunk to actually carry anything out. Like I've likened it to Boris Johnson's government. If you look at and I warned about this at the time, the 2019 Conservative Manifesto was horrific. Horrific. There were some things promised in that which would have stripped away some of our democratic checks and balances. The Tories did scale back, right to protest and things like that. But ultimately, we sort of dodged a bullet. We got away with it because ultimately his ministers were too incompetent. He surrounded his cabinet with loyalists. He got people in who were, in his own words, reportedly, he didn't say this publicly, but apparently reportedly said, he surrounded himself with old lions, people who would be loyal to him, who wouldn't challenge him, right? Donald Trump has done the same, or he's done the same thing. He's surrounded himself with loyalists, people who think like him, who won't tell him no or anything like that. So it may well be they're simply too incompetent, which will at least slow them down. And in the meantime, I mean, that's a hope, not an expectation. In the meantime, if what they're doing is stunningly unpopular, and I gather that what Doge is doing is not very popular at all, there is still a disconnect in America, though. There still seems to be a disconnect between what Doge is doing and Trump, the president, as if they're two different things, which is mental, because Doge is the most Trump part of the American government. Like, all of the government is under his control, but Doge is the most Trump part of it because it's not an official government department. But it's... So, yeah, the other hope is it becomes so unpopular that puts pressure on Republicans in Congress, because at the moment, Trump is bullying them. So they have to fear the people more than Trump. The people in America need to make Republicans fear them more than Trump, feel that they will do more damage to those Republicans than Trump can. Again, that's a hope, not an expectation. What to do about the Trump problem? Is he a Russian spy? Yeah, he was caught with confidential papers that he wasn't allowed in his toilet, and some were missing. Yes, Trump is a Russian agent, effectively. He may be an unwitting one. He may not see himself as a traitor. He may not. I mean, I don't know how it works in his head, but he is clearly a Russian agent, and has been for some years. And that's not just me, you know. I mean, America said there's more. I mean, all those papers that were published last year made it clear that he was clearly a Russian asset, a willing one as well. And what to do about him, indeed. Matthew there said the German elections tomorrow will be pivotal to the EU's position on Ukraine. If the AfD do well, then they may end up in coalition with the... No one will work in coalition with the AfD. The AfD are it's like, they're not even like Reform UK. You could imagine, if the parliamentary arithmetic allowed, that the Conservatives and Reform UK would form some sort of alliance, maybe not a formal coalition, but some sort of alliance. Who will the CDU won't work with the AfD? That'd be mental. No. But also, I don't think the CDU will... I mean, the coalition that may have to form could be messy. I mean, there's been a lot of pushing of the AfD in social media in Germany. And we all know where that's come from. Two sources. Actually, East and West this time. Russia and America. But there we go. Good, they're saying, could Doge ruin the reputation of Republicans and thus stay out of power for years to come? I'm not really sure, because the problem with the way their elections run is it sort of goes from one, just sort of swings from one to another, doesn't it? I mean, we will see. We will see. We also, again, we know that Trump does not want to have free and fair. Now, I wouldn't necessarily characterize the American elections as free or fair even last year, just like I wouldn't ours, because as far as I'm concerned, if someone who is legally eligible to vote tries to vote and can't, in our country because they didn't have voter ID, in America because they were just removed from the register, then I don't really see how the elections are free and fair. However, within the American system, they ran as they are happy with. Trump does not want them to be remotely free or fair in future. Again, can he do that? It would be difficult, not impossible. Again, this is where we have to hope incompetence rules. Puneeta then saying, old lions, yet he had babyface Sunak as chancellor. Am I missing something? Yes, because that was part of his quote. After he fell, he said this apparently after he fell. So the full quote was, not that it's an exact quote because I don't know his exact words, it's secondhand. But his full quote was, he'd surrounded his cabinet with old lions who wouldn't challenge him, which was why he hesitated with Sunak, because Sunak was a young lion. But he did it anyway because he thought that Sunak was still loyal to him. So, yeah, he used that phrase specifically to say why he then regretted, after 2022, regretted promoting Rishi Sunak. That he should have just stuck to old lions, and he took a chance on Sunak and he regretted it. Even though what he doesn't seem to understand is he fell because of himself. But again, it's him just blaming other people, isn't it? Say, when Republican senators feel the heat of the midterms, maybe they will fight back. Well, yes, but Trump is going at speed here, or whoever's behind Trump is going at speed. So let us hope there's something to fight back with then, because there isn't an organized. This is the thing we say: it's not an organized opposition. And when I keep saying things like the problem is that there's no leaders of the Democrats and Republicans, people go, oh, yes, I know, the caucus system, it's shite. I know it sort of has worked for a long time, but what it also means is you do not have an opposition to a rogue president. You have enough opposition to a normal president because Republicans are naturally going to come together on some common issues against a Democrat president, and Democrats are naturally going to come together on a lot of issues that come as a Republican president. But what they don't have is that sort of coordinated opposition to a rogue president of either party. Parcel saying, problem in Germany is when you take out AfD and Die Linke, there's only just enough support left to form a coalition government. So the same parties have to keep doing grand coalition. They do, but they will not work with the AfD because they are actually just literal Nazis. I mean, apart from anything else, I mean, again, I go back to British politics. So look what happened in 2015. So 2010, you had the coalition, Conservatives and Lib Dems. 2015, the Conservatives won a majority. Did austerity make them popular or something? No, it didn't. What happened was it made the Lib Dems very unpopular. The Lib Dems, because of their association with the Conservatives' austerity, abandoned them. So what happened? Because we are first past the post, Cameron didn't really win any extra votes. He won a few extra votes. It wasn't really very many. But what happened was, in loads of seats where it's between the Lib Dems and the Conservatives, because there's lots of seats that are between those two, because the Lib Dems lost a lot of their core support, the Conservatives won by default by being the challenging. So they ended up getting a majority. The same would happen to the CDU if they worked with the AfD. Come the next elections, what do you think CDU supporters are? They're not going to support the CDU. They would collapse. It would be an insane thing to do. And I don't think they would want to anyway. I actually just genuinely don't think they would want to. But their voters would certainly not. Wanga Pagan saying, Phil seems to be, Starmer seems to be really putting our weight behind Zelensky. Yeah. Should we take ownership of the defence convo as Conservative reform are actually weak on this? Well, they will inevitably do that anyway. But the problem is, I mean, you say throwing his weight behind Zelensky, great. We don't have much weight, is the problem. We don't have much. Our military has been hollowed out since 2010. I mean, look at it. This is how bad it is, right? So in 2010, and this was after the global crisis, defence spending was 2.7% of GDP. 2.7%. Now it's 2.3%. Starmer thinks he can get it up to 2.5% in 5 years. That's still not up to where it was in 2010. And we actually have war in Europe. So this is how badly the Tories hit our defence sector since 2010. Even with war in Europe, where a major alliance is leaving and we really need to plug the gap if we can, we cannot even get defence spending up to where it was in 2010, either in real terms or as a share of GDP. Because remember, our GDP in real terms was bigger than it is now, even after the financial crash. Our GDP, our economy is actually smaller by it's about 26% smaller in real terms, if we take international inflation into account, than it is now. So even the 2.3% we're spending is smaller than it would have been if our economy had at least carried on growing. So the Tories and Brexit and a whole load of other things has reduced our military to like, there's nothing to it. I mean, it's still, and that's what's distressing as well, because although we say nothing to it, it's still bigger than most militaries in Europe, which is horrendous. You know, we are still the biggest contributor outside of America in terms of raw dollars. We are the biggest contributor to NATO. And our defence budget has been completely hollowed out. So other armies in Europe, I mean, France is sort of on rough par. Other countries much closer to Russia do their best. But a lot of other countries have like, what the hell happened to their militaries? They just let it collapse after their own empires fell down. John there saying, I doubt any more streets or parks in Ukraine will be named after Boris Johnson. I do hope not. I mean, it's not really the most important thing to talk about, I guess, but it always offended me that Ukrainians thought Boris Johnson was on their side, because I just felt you're just being as if things weren't bad enough for them. I tried to say he's being gaslit. He doesn't care. He does not give a shit. You know, Boris Johnson has been, like some Tories just took money from Russians because they just wanted money. They didn't have any evil intent. Boris Johnson was a proper Russian asset. I wish Labour would slam the Tories with what they've done to this country like you do, Phil. Makes my blood boil. They're just, I mean, it's not even like they don't try. They just don't do it very well. You know what I said as well? I think I said in a recent video, I was talking about social media, that the Labour channel could just do cat videos and be on with it. And do you know what? Keir Starmer's actually put out a cat video. I'm going to find it again. Because obviously he's into his cats. And he got a new cat recently, a little kitten. So he's done a video about how it's getting on with Larry the cat. How his cats are getting on with Larry the cat. He's put it out. It's got very few views, but if he did that more often, he'd probably get more views. He should just do more of that. Cat videos. Our SAS is still lauded though. Yeah, but you can only go so far with elite special forces. You need a large conventional army. To take on Russia, you need a large conventional army. Because that's what they have. The problem with funding the MOD is they waste incredible sums. Contractors put in bills of many thousands for half a day's work, or £900 for a hammer, and they pay it, keep on useless now. So, interestingly then, I did do a video about that. When was it? Yesterday, I think. Apparently, one of the things that Rachel Reeves wants in return for finding a way to boost defence spending is that the Ministry of Defence doesn't get to basically spend its own money, that it'll come under the Treasury's purview. So I think that military spending will, one good thing that may come out of this is that our military spending may be professionalised a little bit, because it has for years. And I said on Graham's stream yesterday, I remember things going way back. You know, I remember issues about like buying tanks that couldn't function in the desert, wrong filters and stuff. When we were primarily fighting desert warfare, and it's like, yeah, you know, all sorts of, it's utterly ridiculous. But anyway, we've run out of time. But thanks very much for coming on, everyone. Have a great rest of evening. And until next time, I'll see you later.